We're going to kick it off in a minute, but I want to make sure everyone has coffee and whatever they need to drink. Of course, you can get up and move around throughout. Quick show of hands, who was here yesterday? I see a lot of, wow, so a lot of repeat. Thank you all for being here yesterday. Thanks for coming back today. This would be a pointless exercise if people didn't come out and support it, so very, very grateful for the solidarity. Bear with me for the people that weren't here yesterday. I do want to repeat my shout outs to a few people without whom you can imagine this would just be me and that wouldn't be good. Brightbox, amazing venue. The whole team here has been extremely helpful. I'm very grateful. Please support your local businesses. And a couple of people that are here that are my partners in crime. Foremost, Christine Patrick, who runs the Winchester Book Gallery. Christine, thank you for always being you. Please continue to support her store and the authors that are here all weekend. We got books for sale, authors are here to sign. I want to thank Karen Vasquez, who's on our advisory board. Pretty much everything you see that's cool, she took care of. And then the handsome, intelligent gentleman you met on the way in is Ben Mayrides. Ben has organized this on the back end, and like I think I said yesterday, this will probably be an analog experience without Ben's wizardry. So thank you all for this, and again, thank you all for being here. Why don't we go ahead and kick it off with our first panel, which I'm super excited about. I'm going to bring up Jeff and Gregg. There he is. Come on up, fellas, and I'll introduce you both. And apologies, Todd Sloan from American University was supposed to be here, but he had a family funeral to attend. So he is, I think, in St. Louis right now. So we're going to talk a little bit about community, but I'll tee it up by saying that I'm really happy to say I've had a lot of support, a lot of enthusiasm from people that have been helpful. But these two gentlemen, from the first conversation I had with each of them, got it. They got the mission, they got what I'm trying to do, and have offered their support. So I'm profoundly grateful. It was very important to me to have you both on this panel to talk about this vision thing, as I think George Bush Sr. called it, 1,000 points of light. So directly next to me is Gregg Wilhelm. He is the Director of Creative Writing at George Mason University. His expertise covers book publishing, arts administration, and higher education. He started his career at Johns Hopkins University Press, launched 3 imprints, including one with a major independent bookseller, and founded nonprofit literary arts organization City Lit Project. He's held adjunct and leadership positions at several universities while earning an MFA from the University of Tampa. Prior to joining George Mason, Gregg served as the Director of Marketing and Enrollment Development at the Maryland Institute College for Art. And Dr. Jeff Coker is an accomplished scholar and teacher with extensive leadership expertise in higher education. In his role as Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences at Shenandoah, he leads a diverse and talented faculty that includes programs in the natural and behavioral sciences, social sciences, and the humanities. Dr. Coker holds the rank of professor in the Department of History. He received his BA in history from the University of Texas at Austin, holds the PhD from Ohio University and the Contemporary History Institute, and is the author of 3 books and numerous articles in United States political and intellectual history. The U.S. Department of State has tapped Dr. Coker on numerous occasions to speak internationally on current challenges in higher education, administrative issues, and teaching. In 2007, he was named Distinguished Alumnus in the Department of History at Ohio University. Prior to arriving at Shenandoah University, Coker held appointments at the University of North Florida in Jacksonville and Belmont University in Nashville, Tennessee. He's actively engaged in the broader Winchester community, including serving on the board of directors of the Museum of the Shenandoah Valley and the board of the Northern Shenandoah Valley chapter of the National Alliance on Mental Illness. He's an avid baseball and soccer fan and has a daughter, Kate. Please join me in welcoming Gregg and Jeff. So this entire weekend, by design, there's a few themes we've circled around repeatedly, and I think the key one which is both critical to the larger 1455 mission, but also I think what many of us are engaged in is community, and the various ways you can define that. I would love to start out by hearing each of you kind of talk about when you hear community, whether it's the big C or the various little C's, in terms of your mission as student-facing, and doing what you can to both promote and celebrate energy and creativity, how do you define creativity as it relates to your current roles?
Good morning. Before I answer that question, I want to give some props to Sean Murphy. Round of applause. Sean's a Mason alum, and our mutual friend, the chair of the English department, put us together. And I essentially started a 1455 type of organization in Baltimore in 2004. So when Sean told me about his desire to start a literary arts organization in the state of Virginia, but for writers everywhere, I immediately said, "You fool, don't do it." It's hard work. It's hard work, and a lot of it is not fun. Governance, board development, fundraising, friend-raising. Friend-raising is actually probably more fun than fundraising, but it's hard work, and there are very few days like this and weekends like this where you really get to enjoy and participate and communicate with fellow artists who have this problem called writing. You can't stop writing. So Sean, I just absolutely congratulations on, this is not your first event, but it's probably your the largest event.
Sure.
And it's been, yesterday was phenomenal, today looks like another great day at the Summer Literary Festival, so congratulations.
Thank you.
Community, I mean, so I'm going to speak specifically about creative writing and the quirkiness of being a literary artist. You know, of all of the creative arts, creative writing is peculiar in the sense that it's largely done alone, writing, and consumed alone, reading. You know, theater has ensembles, you know, artists have big studios, or visual artists have studios, musicians have bands. There's usually some sort of component of community that's inherent in the art form itself, whereas creative writing doesn't always get to enjoy that. That's why I think more than any of the other creative arts, community is absolutely vital to creative writing, because although it's done alone and consumed alone often, it's really done and done in community and energized by community. Networking, learning elements of craft, learning, like we talked about yesterday, the trends in publishing or how to get published. You just can't go it alone. You simply can't go it alone. I guess you can, but I don't think any really great art gets created alone in complete solitude. So opportunities like 1455, MFA programs, while not absolutely necessary to your craft, could be another place to find community. I was 42 when I entered an MFA program. And I just, after, I spent 12 years as a book publisher, 12 years as a literary arts administrator, a little bit academia sprinkled throughout those years. And it dawned on me one day that I had stopped writing, because I was so busy fundraising, luring unsuspecting members of the community to join my board of directors, dealing with state tax law, federal tax law, all the stuff that I never went to school to learn and never wanted to be. It's vital. Moments like this are absolutely vital. And then I think Jeff could probably speak to this a little bit too, although it sounds like from his participation in the community, we're sitting on the board of directors of the museum, there's this invisible barrier often between campuses and the community at large, right? So I've spent a lot of my career trying to break those barriers down, infiltrating them from the outside, and now I'm sort of on the inside trying to do the same thing. Because, we also can't thrive in these silos, right? And oftentimes, campuses themselves are silos, and within those campuses, there are a whole bunch of other silos. So it's been exciting for me to learn how open Mason is to sort of interdepartmental collaborations, various partnerships, public-private partnerships. So it really is, the path that Sean is taking in developing community for you, the literary arts participants. It needs his support, and support not just in dollars, in registration, in attending things like this. Like he said, very first thing this morning, if you don't come to this, it's all for naught, so why do we do it? But volunteering, spreading the word, using social media throughout the weekend to post on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter about your experiences here. So thank you for participating in not only being part of the community, but for helping grow this community, Sean's vision, and 1455.
Thank you, Greg. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here the early session. We're going to a music festival, outdoor music festival later this week, and this reminds me of like the morning concerts when everybody's just getting up and getting their coffee. So as the day builds, I know the energy is going to build. I'll start. I'm going to say a couple of things about the work that Sean's doing as well before I talk a little bit about some broader things. Several months ago, there were rumors rattling around that there was some guy here in town, and he was going to start some sort of thing for writers and literature, and there might be a festival involved, and so I started lurking around, and I finally had a chance to track him down, and we sat down, and there's that line in that movie, "You had me at hello." Within a few minutes of Sean talking, I was all in on this project, and there's so many reasons why. From where I sit as an administrator at a university, and Greg, I think you'll have some comments on this as well, but also as an historian, everyone likes to always think that they are living at a pivotal moment in history. And I always tell my students, the funny thing is that's very seldom the case. Most people are not living during a pivotal moment, but it's a human tendency to think that we are. But actually think that in this country we are living at a pivotal moment right now, and for many different reasons. I was at one of the sessions yesterday morning, and we were talking about the divisions in the country, and that, as one of the panelists had said, describing the culture in the United States right now and the dialogue taking place, it's as if Americans are watching two different movies at the same time, and increasingly there is less and less communication and common ground across those two kind of covering narratives about our country. And you combine that with, I think, an increasing and very troubling, I think, skepticism towards a certain orientation in education. We see it all the time at the university that over the last 30 years or so, there has been a steady decline in the number of students who are opting for studies in the humanities, and really was compounded by the recession, in the late 2000s, the first decade. And for a while, I took the position that this was probably just a moment in time, and that at some point the numbers will start recovering, but it's not looking that way now. I think in higher education, we have to begin to reimagine how we are delivering the humanities and how we are presenting the humanities to young people. But at the same time, those of us who work at universities, and several of my colleagues are here, students are ambivalent because they come to college craving the kind of creativity and thoughtfulness that comes with studies, say, in creative writing and literature and broader humanistic study, and yet they're living in a public culture that is increasingly skeptical of education, that doesn't have clear cash value to it. How is this going to get me a job? That question as students are coming through the door. And so one of the, and this is what keeps me up at night, this is my job, my career, is to try to figure out approaches that we can reconnect young people, particularly, to the liberal arts, generally, and humanistic study in particular. And that's where I think, at least from where I'm sitting, thinking about the role that 1455 can play in our community, it's to bring this kind of culture, this kind of creativity, this kind of communication back into the public space in a way that is very much missing. We're trying to do that, on campus, but to see this being fostered in the community, I mean, it's such a synergy with what we're trying to accomplish. And one of the things that I was most thrilled about in all of this was your focus on youth. The team poetry competition. I think a real orientation to making sure that everything that's happening with 1455 is mindful of the fact that getting young people involved in this and showing them that engaging with creativity, engaging with writing, and engaging with the life of the mind isn't just something you do when you're on a campus. It's not something you just do in a classroom, that this is what people in a community do, and to normalize that. And so of everything, I think that that's of profound importance in what you're doing. And as Gregg mentioned, universities oftentimes are guilty of inward facing. And even universities such as Shenandoah, we spend so much of our time exploring ways that we can be a borderless campus and connect with the community. There's always that town and gown kind of dynamic, and so anything that brings us together in a common cause, I think, is a good thing for all involved. And so thank you again for being that guy who has shown up and plopped into our humble little community and has kind of lit a fire with creativity and writing, and it's right behind. And the thing, this is just the beginning, right? And so I suspect that in 10 years, we'll be doing a retrospective about how much impact that this has had on the community.
So thank you both for that insight and approbation. So I haven't talked a ton, and I don't want to talk a ton about 1455 and myself and the mission, partly because it's amply documented on the website, which I encourage everyone to visit and engage with in terms of comments and feedback. But my story, there is a sort of full circle in the sense that, my background, academia, a voracious English major, and thought that would be my life. And I ended up doing a lot of writing, I ended up doing a lot of journalism, and I checked some boxes that I thought were important, and were important. Foremost, as an aspiring writer, I recognized very early that it was not going to likely be a lucrative or quick fix. It was going to be a lifetime of tremendous failure, tremendous diligence, and writing badly to eventually pick out a few worthwhile pieces. But what I found, in addition to the solitude that I think is necessary to get the work done, particularly in a social media age where we all kind of live our lives online, if you're serious about your craft, you have to have the butt in the seat and not have instant approval for everything you're doing. You have to let things curate. But what I eventually, as I got into my 40s, recognized was one of my primary impulses was to celebrate this creative force that sustained me, whether it's music, particularly writing and writers, and in my own writing have tried to find ways to celebrate that. So I as a journalist, I've written a lot about jazz, I've written a lot about kind of the dispossessed, and as a white male doing my tiny part to do a correction of sorts on the historic way we approach. But what I'm getting at is I was doing a lot of these things and feeling like I'm doing my part as a writer, I'm using my modest skills to advance that. But there is that aspect of a tree falling in the forest. What is it worth, no matter how great this piece of writing is or a book you wrote, if you're not interacting and sharing and you're not experiencing that inspiration. And for me, it was going to a writing center, and for the first time since I was a grad student, having that unbelievable energy and the inspiration and solidarity of being around kindred spirits in a supportive environment where I think there's a superficial supportive environment on social media that cuts both ways. You get the immediate likes, you get the flame wars, but it's fleeting. And what I found and what really prompted me to start this crazy venture was having seen it in a previous engagement and saying, I want more of that, and what better way for the community, large and small, but also for me personally and spiritually, to be around people. And I can say that this weekend reinforces this idea of just being inspired. The teen poetry contest, the downside of that was it's excruciating to be in a position, especially as a writer, rejection is the norm. I mean, it just is. To be the decision maker is not a fun process, but it's a problem you want to have. If you're we got almost 70 submissions, and the quality overall was astonishing. That gives me hope, not in a hokey way about the future or youth, but it proves that despite social media, despite all the nonsense about millennials, there's passion, there's incredible empathy and intelligence. So my mission has been, maybe on a broader scale, how can I celebrate that, cultivate it, and not bring it? It's here, it's everywhere, but we need environments where we can come together and talk and support each other, because it's too easy to do it on social media. So, and you guys are, with sincere and due respect, I'm in the trenches, but I'm still in a remove. You guys are in the trenches every day, so I salute the work you do, but I'd love you to talk about, a little bit about what are some of the challenges, what are some of the ways you find hope, and how does this all kind of, this community building on a day-to-day basis?
A brief story about the origin of the City Lit Project in Baltimore, talking about community. I was between my career as a publisher and what became a career as a literary arts administrator, sort of floundering. The last imprint I had founded with a large independent bookstore in Baltimore by the name of Bibelo had just imploded when the booksellers were in such financial peril, the owners of this company, that they put all their money off into offshore bank accounts in the Cook Islands. And one day I went to work, and the original Jackson Pollock painting that was on my office wall was gone, because they sold all their art to their kids for $1. So I was suddenly like, oh, I was really, really flattered in what my next step was going to be. And so my wife is from Minnesota, so my first trip with her in 2002, whenever I go to a new town, the first thing I try to do is, being the nerd that I am, find the independent bookseller in that town, check it out. And there was a great one called Ruminator Books in Minneapolis at the time. So I went to find it, and unbeknownst to me, its location was in something called Open Book, which was a rehabbed warehouse in an up-and-coming section of Minneapolis. But in this large open book warehouse was the Ruminator bookstore that I found, but unfortunately it's also since gone out of business, as was the case in the early aughts with independent booksellers. But also in this warehouse was the Minnesota Center for Book Arts, and I walk in and these kids were like covered in paper mache up to their elbows making books. There was a coffee joint, the headquarters of Milkweed Editions, which is one of the great independent book publishers in the country. And this thing I didn't even know about called The Loft, and The Loft is the Literary Center. I said, I didn't even know this kind of thing existed. So whatever we can do to help you get to a point of knowing that these things exist without wasting the first dozen years of your career, I think that's part of what's important about things like 1455, to know that these communities do exist. And ever since then, of course, I mean, there's the Writer Center in Bethesda, there's something called the Front Porch, I think, in Nashville.
Right, that's right, yeah.
And so these communities exist around the country, and in fact, there's even sort of subgroup of the Association of Writers and Writing Programs, which is the big academic association for sort of MFA programs. And there's a subset of that called conferences and centers, writers' conferences and centers, because there's not enough of us to have our own association. So if you ever, we mentioned this yesterday, this annual conference comes around to a town near you, usually every 3 years or so. So 3 years from now, it'll be in Philadelphia. So if you're in this game, I would highly encourage you to go to this conference. It's well worth the registration. Not only to find out about journals and programs, great sessions on craft and publishing, but also check out the Writers' Conferences and Centers subgroup to see what kind of opportunities are out there, because what happens is when you get published, you can often head to these centers. The Loft, for example, has a robust reading series. City Lit Project in Baltimore now still has a robust reading series, and they're sort of filling the gap a little bit of what was the void that the demise of independent bookstores left behind. But there are great independent bookstores, and they themselves are epicenters of community as well. And often for City Lit, as it is going to be for 1455, we were nomadic. We didn't have a center. We operated out of libraries. We partnered with museums for programs. We partnered with schools, and I want to get back to this thing about the teams. I mean, I would go into West Baltimore middle schools on afternoons and try to encourage young people to write after they struggled with the day in their academic environment. And Baltimore schools, if you don't know, are not very well funded. They're struggling. So I would do this for weeks on end, and ultimately end up using their writing, improving their writing, getting them engaged about book design and picking a cover picture. So really, and ultimately, because of the technology I talked about yesterday, I was able, at the end of this sort of program with middle school students, give them a book that they helped design, title, write, and they really feel vested. But what they didn't realize, what I was sneaking in on them, was collaboration, team building, project management, creativity in the way of thinking and whatnot. And those are sort of the skills, to sort of get back to Jeff's point. The pendulum is maybe hopefully swinging a little bit back toward our side in the humanities, sort of like the way employers today are talking about their desire to have employees with emotional intelligence and being able to sort of think outside of just being, hey, I majored in accounting, I got a job at T. Rowe Price, and I'm an accountant for the next 4 years, you know, sort of the way that it sort of became based on vocation, like in the 80s. So back to your question, which was, how do I deal with it day-to-day in the trenches? It's tough. You know, I don't tuition at, for the MFA program at New Haven is like $32,000 a year. To come out knowing full well that 85% of what you're going to produce in this program and thereafter is going to be rejected. And even if it does get published, it's not going to make a hell of a lot of money. Right? So it's a tough sell when it comes to the old recruitment cycle. Yeah, come on, it's amazing, where the cost of living is next to nothing. We do, it's 65%, roughly 65% of our incoming, all our students are funded, but the funding is modest. It does include free tuition. That's probably the biggest value of getting funded at Mason, or any program, frankly. But it's tough. Our stipends are 16 grand. It's tough for anybody to live on 16 grand in Northern Virginia. It's tough for my family to live in Northern Virginia. Coming from a cost of living situation like this in Baltimore, which is a lot more affordable. But I think the students who do come to Mason, as the students that come to Shenandoah University, they get it. They're hungry, like you said, for the creativity, eager for the rigor of academic learning, and they sort of understand what their investment is going to pay off. And it may not be directly in writing and getting paid for your writing, but it's going to be it's going to show itself in creative thinking, critical thinking, playing well with others, being able to make, being nimble and adaptable, and being able to make decisions quickly and creatively, because things change so much today, much more than when we were coming up looking for jobs, because of technology, because of social media. So I think the students who do attend our universities and any universities, they understand it, they get it, but it's tough. And also like Jeff, I've spent a lot of time railing against higher education and the price of higher education and the bloat in higher education. And now I'm part of the problem. But hopefully, as not a career academic, hopefully as someone who can sort of maybe come up with some solutions in my own small way for the program that I'm in direct charge of, and in the department within its house, in the college that hosts it, in the state's largest research institutions, absolutely phenomenal, and the size of this, the size that many universities can grow to be, and like Jeff, find ways to create channels of town and gown collaboration and partnership.
And I'll add to this discussion of community partnerships that we have some of that here in Winchester. I want to at least recognize that at Shenandoah we have an ongoing program called Project Right that brings gives opportunities for young people to come and work not only with faculty at Shenandoah to bring in authors to work with them to create some excitement about writing, and so there are pieces of that. And so 1455 Project Right, projects that Gregg are describing, another piece of this, a broader piece of this, has to do with civic engagement. That you were describing, the places where you see the kids, getting involved in crafts or doing creative writing. Those, in my mind, those are gateways to getting them more engaged in their broader communities and framing experiences for them when they're young to show them that it's important to be involved in the community. And I think, there's always so much discussion about the role that social media is playing in our society. And sometimes I think it's overdone, but one of the dynamics I see is that there are increasingly people who, if they're on social media and they're clicking like, then they're somehow engaged in broader issues, and that having to penetrate that and to frame for people that getting involved in community means getting out and interacting with people and getting involved in your local issues, and that it strikes me that projects such as this offer young people the opportunity to see that in action in a way that's really important. Shenandoah is a relative, compared to Mason, it's a much smaller university. Students come to the university looking for kind of that small school environment where they'll work closely with professors. We do as much as we can to get them engaged in the community from the very beginning, because we want to model for them that when you leave here, part of your life will be to be engaged in the broader community. And it strikes me that 1455 can play that role in helping to model that for students. To go back just a minute about life in the trenches, there are, and I made an allusion to this a minute ago, there are real battles going on, I argue, for the soul of higher education right now. These are battles being fought not out in public culture, but at the tables where budgets are decided within universities. There's a lot of pressure on universities to increase enrollment. There always has been. And so there's a tension between marketing our programs in ways that attract students and also delivering the education that we know they need and will best serve them. I frame it, increasingly I've been framing it for students, and I think this would go, for adults as well, that for whatever reason we have tended to propose that the creative arts and practical life, or professional, whatever you want to, however you want to frame that, are two separate worlds. And that, you know, we typically talk about how you can have a professional life, but you can balance it by also having this creativity in your life. You can recharge, you can, you know, the thing that concerns me about that, it still poses the creative arts, creative expression, as an add-on, at the end of the day, when you've done everything important, then you can kind of relax and engage in, you know, this creative work. But it's obviously clear, if you start to think about it, that those pieces of creativity actually enhance one's ability to do one's work. And that's the message that, you know, I try to impart to students is, if you want to be an accountant, an engineer, that's fantastic. The world needs good accountants. The world needs good engineers. I'm not here to try to convince you that becoming an investment broker is necessarily a bad thing. That's not the dialogue. The dialogue should be, imagine if you can incorporate some sense of creativity into the thinking that you're being tasked with in your life as a professional, how much better a professional you will be. I had a colleague who had an art gallery in Manhattan who got a call, this was years ago, got a call from the engineering school at NYU. And he's a sculptor. And the dean or the director of this engineering program brought him in and said, we're frustrated because we bring in the best and brightest kids from all over the world. These are you know, the Big Bang Theory type kids, you know, with, you know, perfect SAT scores, and they can do calculus in their sleep. And if you ask them to do a task, they will do it, you know, and they'll do it perfectly. But there's no creative bone in their body. And how do we jumpstart that? How do we activate that? So they came up with an idea of having all of their engineering students take sculpting classes. Because now, for the first time, you put a lump of clay in front of an engineering student, they have to create. There's no formula for it, there's no recipe for it, there's not an instruction booklet, there's not an algebraic formula. You have to find some way to make something out of this. And they were very impressed with the results that these young people, for the first time, were actually being told that, you know, whatever you created, there's no right answer. And so it strikes me that looking for opportunities to connect the creative arts to the lives of people in a foundational way, not in an extra way. And I think that's the message that we could be sending to the community as well. Come to 1455, engage in writing. Have you ever written anything creatively? If not, give it a try. It will make you, it's more than making you well-rounded, and it's more than just, you know, giving you something to relax with. It will actually improve your life in myriad ways. And so that's one of those, you know, sort of in the trenches conversations that are ongoing right now. And I guess I should pause that. The picture out there isn't maybe as bleak as I'm making it. You know, the liberal arts are alive and well. The humanities are alive and well. That's true all over the country. It's just these, you know, the broader trends that we're watching and continue to have the focus being on making sure there's some centrality. And there has been some discussion too that in the next generation or so, we are going to continue to see technological advancements in areas such as artificial intelligence and robotics, that increasingly there's going to be kind of a pull back towards needing the kind of creativity that comes with humanistic study, for the very reason that a lot of the work that will be done will be automated. And so it's an interesting thing to wonder, you know, in 25 years, what the culture, what the market will be demanding from young people to be successful. And so there are really some real glimmers of hope here. And I guess I should add too that a place like Winchester, most of our students at Shenandoah are drawn from this part of Virginia, moving down the corridor, up into Western Maryland, Western Pennsylvania. We draw a little bit from the city, but not a lot. I mean, most of our students are coming from more of a rural, small town environment. A lot of them are first generation college students, a lot of them. And so another piece of all of this is giving them the opportunity to see a wider world, engaging with difference and diversity of opinion in ways that they probably just haven't had an opportunity so far in their lives, and that this kind of work is talk about gateways, is a gateway to opening up a world of understanding and connection with a broader diversity than they can be very effective in that role as well. We're often taking students abroad, and for many of them, it's the first time they've been out of the country. Some of them, the first time they've even been on an airplane. And so all of this to say that all of these pieces, what you're doing at 1455, what we're trying to accomplish in higher ed, kind of speak to these same goals of civic engagement, engagement with difference and diversity, being more broadly aware of the world outside of one's kind of immediate sphere, and then also to connect all of that with one's life goals and career aspirations. That the more you unpackage it, the missions that we share are maybe not lockstep, but pretty close to it. And so the synergies there just are pretty obvious. So.
And I've seen over the last several years an increase in help wanted ads for white collar jobs that say wanted storyteller. And I'm like, well, that's what we do. And that could be, telling, it's certainly in our world then, what's grant writing? Telling a compelling story and then backing it up with the finances.
Yeah, I mean, as a advocate for the humanities and liberal arts, as a recovering grad student, English major, I've had the opportunity, the honor to return to Mason quite a bit to speak to graduating or incoming, and as it'd probably be a stretch for you to imagine, but there's a bunch of buttoned up professionals, and I'm the weird uncle. But what I try to do and tell these kids is, it doesn't matter to an extent what you're studying for, because you're probably not going to end up doing what you think you're studying for now. And if the liberal arts have anything going for them, and they have quite a bit, you're maybe being trained to do a job as, say, an accountant or a lawyer, but the liberal arts are preparing you for how you do that job and what you do when you're not doing that job. So I think it's a very easy case to make, but rather, again, for me, my impetus, rather than talking about it or shouting from the rooftops, show, don't tell, right? The number one writing rule. And I think, how do we cultivate that solidarity? If you talk to any writers that are here this weekend, or those of you in the room that write, I think it's pretty fair to say that anyone with any experience probably hasn't gotten rich right away, and frankly probably doesn't do it for the money anyway, because if they couldn't do it on their own terms, they wouldn't want the accolades. Most writers are telling stories so they can make sense of their own world and the broader world, how they interact with it. But that would be journal writing without the real imperative of sharing that with other people. And every writer I've ever talked to, every musician I've ever talked to, the key thing is communicating and conveying feeling through expression. So by being able to foster an environment where different types of creative people are coming together, everybody's learning something. You're giving the artists an opportunity to express themselves, and I think you're enlarging minds just by doing that. So what better, it's kind of like, we can and should interrogate all the different ways to solve this puzzle, but like many enigmas, the answer is probably right in front of us. The best way to cultivate this passion is to show it in action. And I think what you two are doing, again, day to day, is guiding and training and encouraging. But what we come together, I believe, is how do we find environments where we celebrate this? It need not be a festival. It could be a pop-up poetry reading. But I think what gives me a lot of faith and inspiration is this idea that there are people hungry for the content. There's people hungry to share it. So if not us, who? There is an element of that too.
Was there a question in there?
Well, the meaning of life, basically, yeah.
Well, I mean,
No pressure.
my first master's degree is in theology, so I can go down that path if you want. Look, I mean, we write alone because we're trying to figure something out. No matter what genre you write, literary fiction, romance, mystery, horror, science fiction, we sit in front of a computer and type because we're trying to figure something out about the human condition that's troubling us. But then at the end of the day, the ego takes over, and you need affirmation or rebuttal, and that's where the sharing comes in, right? Or you end up, being a purveyor of one type of medium and listening to one type of radio station and reading one type of newspaper and, joining one type of band, right?
Or you become a J.D. Salinger. Even someone at the highest levels that doesn't have that impulse to connect is probably not a very happy person.
That's true, and also those days are just simply over, where he could sit in Connecticut and write and submit his manuscript to the agent, and then not promote it, and still, make enough money for the publisher when they keep him on. I mean, it really is that world is long gone. Yep. But yeah, I mean, I love to write. Often people would say to me, years after being a publisher and founding a literary arts organization, and then I get a poem published in a journal somewhere. Oh, I didn't know you wrote. I said, well, what the hell would I be doing this? If I played the trombone, it would be a trombone nonprofit or something. And it's, we're putting our passion into creating these moments of civic and creative engagement because it's based on the art that we're passionate about. But what's, I think, pretty cool about what we do is that there is such a civic engagement component. And right now, I'm just trying to, who's going to write that definitive Trump-era novel, right? Or maybe Orwell already wrote it. I don't know. So yeah, I mean, and this is what jazzes me. And you can't do this 365 days a year because you're either working or you're raising a family or you're creating the artwork. So these moments to get together are what it's all about. It's what it's really all about.
That makes me think of one other thing, to bring it maybe down from a level of people who write for a living or are trying to carve out, that kind of life of writing. I just think about people who write as part of their lives. I tell you, think about it this way. There was a time in our country where just about every household had a piano in it. How many of you grew up in a house that had a piano with it? I ask my students that now. How many of you have a piano in your house? And far fewer raise their hands anymore. And if they do, it's over in the corner. Nobody's touching it anymore. And to drive the point home even more, there was a time earlier when not only was there a piano in every house, but everyone played the piano because that was pretty much how you could interface with music. There was no recorded music. There was no technology. You wanted to hear music, someone was going to have to pull out an instrument and make music. And nobody was trying to make a living doing it. It was just part of the fabric of one's life to have music in life. And so, to some degree, I think the work that you're doing here and the work that we are trying to do at the university is to frame for students that the written word can be an intrinsic part of your life and will be such a meaningful and central part of your life moving forward. And at a time when technology might be pulling in some slightly different directions to help frame for people, that writing, and you said a minute ago, writing clarifies, writing can take the muddle of one's mind and put it down in a way that makes sense to you in a way that nothing else can. And those of you who do write know that. Getting young people to experience that and normalize that, I think, is such a critical role that we're all trying to accomplish here. And so it just, so there's the civic engagement part, but there's also kind of the kind of inward part, kind of self strengthening that comes with creative writing.
So I'd love to take some questions. We're nearing the end. Did anyone have a burning? Do you have a question?
No.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry, I was waiting for something.
Ma'am?
I'm telling you nothing that you don't already know, but I'm going to give my perspective. That Shenandoah, obviously, it began as a conservatory. And when it came to Winchester, they added some junior college courses. When I lived here in they actually called the conservatory the alumni conservatory of my high school because so many musicians came here, including my husband. But when we lived here in the 80s and 90s, they expanded the health sciences and the business programs, and it seemed like that they forgot about the conservatory. It was this hidden gem, and I still tell people that I think it's the best kept secret of Shenandoah is the conservatory. Does that pass, that having the conservatory as less significant but still an important part of the university, do you think it influences the type of students that you see and maybe that, not just in music but in everything, and that maybe it also, we can see that Shenandoah can emphasize the humanities more than maybe George Mason could or school doesn't have that.
Now, it's such an important and deep question that one of the things that's happening in higher ed that universities, especially small privates, are learning is that you can't be everything. Larger public universities have a particular mission and role to play. But the bottom line is that small privates need some kind of identity and they can't do it all, right? Although there are administrators who wish we could do it all. And so the way I read Shenandoah's history in the last 25 years, it really has matured and grown in a way that it's expanded in some of these areas that previously were not part of kind of the identity of the school. But I think you're right, moving forward, there's a lot of question about, okay, what is it that would differentiate? A student coming to Shenandoah can't get maybe what she would get going to Mason. So what are those pieces that make a Shenandoah education unique? And I think what we're moving towards is that bringing together of the creative arts and professional education, that we could bring those together in a way that typically they're seen as either or. And in that framing, the conservatory has a really important part of playing in that identity. But not just the conservatory. I'm starting my 5th year at SU and living in Winchester, and I'm still startled sometimes when I talk to people about, I tell them I'm the Dean of Arts and Sciences, and so they start talking about the conservatory, and I say, no, there is a Dean of the conservatory. I oversee programs like history and English, and they're like, do you have an English program? And so it's all of those liberal arts programs, including the performing arts, but also humanities and social sciences, that I think we are asking that question about how we can bring them into our larger identity without losing something that's really important to us. And I think we're on the way of getting there, but we live in the real world, right? I mean, Shenandoah understands that, we are also educating and preparing students for opportunities, and so we have to be mindful of the fact that we are not only a music school. We take a lot of pride in that history, but we also recognize that there are these real trends in the marketplace, and that students, or I put it another way, you can become trained to get to work in the health professions, but if we can do it better, and if we can inculcate a liberal arts foundation in that, then that's a good reason to be a Shenandoah student. So I hope that helps a little bit with that. Yeah. But we're in a transitional period. There's no question that, as an historian, I just can't help but contextualize that Shenandoah University is kind of in a transitional period in terms of what its identity is, which is an exciting time to be here for that reason, but also there's some open questions about who we are as an institution.
Great. Parting shot.
No,
Last thought.
support 1455. I mean, I think we made the case that It's new on the scene in Winchester. I don't know much about Winchester. I've enjoyed exploring it with my family for the first time this weekend. It seems like it has a nice balance of history and funkiness, great restaurants. I wish Fairfax could do something like your mall out here. This is fabulous. There's a sense of community. I loved it last night, seeing everybody walking around. The history of this place as a music venue, I know, is phenomenal. So I see evidence that Winchesterites, Winchesterians, support the arts. So that gives me a lot of hope of Sean and his vision being successful, not only based here in Winchester, but for writers around the country to come to your town, improve the economic base, and shop at your stores and eat at your restaurants while they're improving their craft and spending time in the retreat center that is yet to come. A big part of 1455 is still yet to come, and that's exciting.
Right on. Well,
Greg, Jeff, thank you very much. Like I said at the beginning, I've appreciated your support, enthusiasm, and I admire the work you both do and that we will do together. So thank you for kicking us off today. Tremendous honor. Join me in thanking these two